Bethel here, filming another video that's going to be a little different than what I usually do when it comes to drawing comics. Usually, I just film myself inking and speed it up, put over music that's not copyrighted, and that's it for the day. But today I wanted to cover a different part of the process that happens not very often, but when it does happen, it's always an interesting little process. And that thing is, I drew a page, I inked it, and then I take a look at it and say, this panel is bad, and I need to redraw it. Now, what a lot of people do is just redraw it in Photoshop or draw it and ink it on a different piece of paper and scan it in and assemble it in Photoshop. What I've done the 2 or 3 times I've had to do this before is that I actually draw it on a separate piece of paper, cut it out, and put it onto the page itself so that it can scan seamlessly. So I don't have to do anything in Photoshop other than coloring it and lettering it. So let me show you what I'm working with so we can get going. All right, so this is a page near the end of the book that I've drawn and inked for the most part, and I realized that this panel is just too stiff, too blocky, and not dynamic enough. Basically, I drew it this way originally because I wanted to make sure I left enough room for his rant. I did that, but it's not a good drawing. So I've since, while inking and drawing, or inking the rest of the page, come up with a better idea. All right, so in my sketchbook, I did a little doodle of what I want to do with the panel. So he's kind of leaned in, expressing his frustration with the situation, obviously, and it looks much more accusatory than, yes, sir, please park your car right over there. Anyway, so here's a piece of 9x12 Bristol. I just measured it out, and I'll be drawing this guy into there. This is a part of the process I don't really record too often, I mean, I'm recording it on paper, obviously, but the penciling process is, to me, perhaps, being the guy that's drawing it, seems the least interesting. If only because I tend to be pretty sketchy, pardon the pun, but pretty messy, I guess is the word I want to say. I pulled a lot of my style, I guess, or the way I construct drawings through the way I was taught. Even though I was drawing beforehand, I really started to codify my process when I was taking art classes in junior college, and I was an actual art major going into animation. And it was a lot of gesture drawing. We had a fair amount of live models, but it was mostly about gesture drawing and just getting shapes and movement onto the page. That messy, sketchy kind of thing is what I still do, obviously, to this day. The reason why I'm hesitant to share that is because it can take a while before any specific shape or drawing actually takes shape, I guess is what I'm trying to say, on the page, because I erase a lot and change ideas and lines all the time. Combined with the fact that I'm using a blue lead pencil, it's hard to erase, and it's pretty waxy, and so it can be difficult to work with. If this hadn't gone well, I probably would have just cut out another square and tried again. But I was able to find, with the help of that drawing I did before, the actual final image. I think my brain is kind of tuned to drawing 4 pages at this point, where I don't do a whole lot of sketching on its own, but something like this, where I take the time, and I'm sure every comic book artist does this, I'm not saying anything special, but I always consider, while laying out a panel, I obviously try to spend time to make the drawing itself look good, but stopping to make sure that, generally speaking, the dialogue that will be going on this page will still fit, will still serve the purpose of what that original bad panel was trying to do. It's all important for the drawing and the panel to work on the larger page. While becoming easier, guns are still no fun to draw. And this is just an example of what I was talking about, how often I change things. I realized that in terms of foreshortening, the pointing finger was not dramatic enough, so I'm like, let's make it bigger. Let's make it more in your face. I don't really have a process. I mean, I probably do, I just don't realize it. When it comes to inking, inking is still something I'm kind of unsure about. Basically, I put down ink well enough to get the job done, but I don't really have a philosophy behind my inking. If anything, I'm still drawing on, pardon the pun again, my sort of animation training, for lack of a better word, meaning not a lot of rendering, sort of uniform line widths, not the thick to thin kind of paintbrush or brush kind of lines that a lot of other people do, and a lot of what I did on my previous comic, where I used a dip pen to get that thick to thin, more artistic, I guess I would say, lines. Despite the fact that I'm drawing this fairly quickly, I'm obviously not drawing it as fast as you're seeing it, but I wanted to get this done, and knowing I was being filmed while I was filming myself. Despite that, this is pretty close, as you've seen in my other videos, of how I ink. I'm not really doing anything different, aside from kind of keep my head out of the frame. But bouncing between pen sizes and sort of filling in slowly from the outside in the lines that I need. You can see how loose my pencils are. I actually do a fair amount of drawing actually with the pens during the inking process. But a lot of that comes, especially when it's panels that have Long John himself. It's a character I've drawn so much now, I don't need a whole lot of pencil guides. When it came to the Johns, meaning Long John, Wan John, and Johnny Mono, I really leaned, even though it's something that kind of guides my design anyway, I really leaned into the silhouette. I wanted to make sure their faces each had different angles, and that their bodies had different overall sort of shapes. That we could put them in a silhouetted lineup and have it be clear who was who. But one of the interesting things is that I also wanted shared design elements across all three characters. And so how that kind of ended up, even though it is kind of loose, that they all kind of have the spiky hair, along John's sort of Sonic the Hedgehog hair. You see that kind of manifest, especially over time, in the curled up ends of the back of Wan John's hair. And when you see wide shots of Johnny Mono's long hair, they all kind of come to 3 points. And also, they do kind of have high, kind of pointy cheekbones. But other than that, I was just kind of going for different shapes, something that makes them look unique. But enough to kind of show that even though they aren't family, literally, that being together, working together, despite their differences, despite the differences that led Johnny and Juan to actually betray Long John, that they actually grew close together, despite Long John's best efforts, it seems. I'm really trying to get better sort of hair ends with the brush. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I just don't have too strong a control over the brush tip at this point. And since it's something I want to practice and something I should practice, but since most of the drawing I do is actually drawing and inking pages, I don't have too many opportunities to do expressive line work with the brushes. So I try when I can, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The design of Johnny is really a mixture of a bunch of things, from looking up sort of cultural designs of the Native Americans that lived in this region, as well as I wanted him to kind of be a sort of slapdash conglomerate of all of his experiences, from growing up in the Native culture in the Mono Basin to working within and being involved in white culture. But more than anything, I wanted him to look cool, and so he was more based on Solid Snake from the Metal Gear Solid video games, but specifically the design from Metal Gear Solid 1. The ink I use for the big fill-ins is this Japanese sumi ink that is real thick, kind of chunky actually. You can really feel it on the page. I think some people actually dilute it with water a bit for washes and whatnot. But I like it just because it does lay on the page heavy. It gives you really good thick blacks and makes the actual page in front of you, the actual physical artifact, looks really nice and clean. One way to probably get better at using brushes would be to get better brushes. This is probably a 20-year-old watercolor brush that I use. I'm probably using it incorrectly. But since I don't really take the time to practice, I just use what I'm comfortable with, and it's doing well so far, so I'm not going to complain. So we're almost done here. Let's turn it over to the actual cut and paste process. I don't really line up things too much. It's already pre-measured, so it should fit. Just some simple scotch tape. Boom. And there we have it. Always underneath the final drawing is the bad drawing. So my mistakes still live with me. But that's kind of what makes it unique and cool. Anyway, thank you for watching. Read the comic at longjohncomic.com. And until next time, thanks for watching me draw.